How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I thought we were actually going to go a full 48 hours, maybe even 72 hours without re-talking to each other again, or at least talking about Roster Mania, but thankfully we have been saved. It has been a very slow Roster Mania up to this point, but who knows, with what we're talking about in this video, it could be the spark to maybe some news starting to break, some full-on announcements starting to go down. Alrighty, so let's go and get into this. So essentially, we just had a article go up on the Breaking Point website. We'll have this article linked in the description from good old Intel CDL, also known as Crone, posting this, letting us know essentially where everything sits for right now, all of the information that he's heard behind the scenes, ultimately what he expects to happen with the rest of the roster. So I thought we could go through this, look at it together, and basically kind of see where every team stands right now and give a little bit of opinion based off of what are these rumored rosters. All right, so let's go and take a look at it. I will have this article linked in the description, but it does say potential. I want to point that out. It does say potential. Does not mean that these are going to be the teams. Everything is going to be the same as it says here on this page. It just means where things sit for this moment. So like I said, you can feel free to browse the article, and we will start things off with the LA Thieves. So no surprise, it looks like this roster is basically going to stick together. Like, you know, they're the champions, right? They went back to back. There's no real surprise. I realize I actually have to raise this a little higher so you guys can see it. But there is no surprise, right? Back to back champions. They won the world championship together on top of it. Now we will jump into Optic Texas. Optic fans maybe sweating just a moment. Everything looks like the roster is going to stay intact together. It has been a wild ride. We saw for a moment Dashi and Illy not being on the team, and then they're back together. I mean, technically Illy and Shotzi were unrestricted free agents, so they technically could have gone anywhere that they wanted. Sounds like Optic is together. The one question mark that you do have, though, is on to Illy. It sounds like something is going to happen, you know, where he maybe talks a little bit more in depth with what he dealt with this year. And I think a lot of Optic Texas fans aren't really concerned about these four necessarily. It's all about who is going to be the substitute for this team, because somebody may have to step in for Illy depending on how the injury sits. So let's go ahead and jump into now Seattle Surge. And this is one of the more interesting teams, I would say, to cover during Roster Mania, and that was only just because of this Mania position. And so it does sound like Seattle are going to stick together for right now. But we had talked about a number of different guys who could be filling that role. If Aristides was going to be available, it sounded like he could fit in perfectly with Mac, Pred, and Sib. Even earlier on, whenever really just free agents were being made known, it was like, okay, Attached could fit perfectly on a team like Seattle Surge. And while I do feel like that is the case, one of the more interesting points of emphasis that this article does point out is that this team didn't make any serious inquiries with other players. I think if you're Surge, you were either all in on making the change, or if you weren't a full 100% about it, then I think you hold back and you move forward with this team. So overall, if this is going to be the team, I think this is the right move to make, but there was no question about it. We could look back at this and be like, gosh, imagine if they had, you know, X player in this main AR position. All right, let's go and bounce down to one of the most interesting teams of Roster Mania. They go for a full team wipe, and we can see it here. This is the rumored team that it sounds like for right now is going to be forming together. So Afro, Attach, Bance, and Cammy. It sounded like Afro was going to be headed to the Toronto Ultra. Bance, I think, was like linked to the London Royal Ravens, or maybe it just made the most sense for him. And then we heard like Cammy could be on Optic Texas. We heard that he could be on NYSL, on Boston. There was a few people even saying that he could be the next or the go-to option for somebody like Atlanta FaZe. This is a huge investment out of the Minnesota Rocker to make moves like this. I really like this team a lot. I do, for a lot of reasons. I think it does put pressure on certain players to perform, specifically Afro, Cammy, and or Attached, depending on who plays the flex versus main AR, and depending on how MW2 plays. I think the spotlight is without a doubt on Cammy coming into this next season. But I love the Toronto integration. I think having 3 EU players alongside of Attached is great. Expect this team to be great in S&D, and really with the respawns being the only question mark. But you gotta love the AR talent that you have together, and I really do like the combinations of the SMGs. Having Afro alongside somebody like Bance, like I said, the Toronto connection to me is great as well. Like what Minnesota is doing, if that is going to be the roster. Now another big one, LAG made the move, right? They are Aristides. They've won the Aristides sweepstakes, it sounds like. I talked about how I expected it to be, you know, maybe Aristides and Attach who can go together, or maybe Aristides and Cammy maybe even Arcties and Gunless, given their history and friendship together. But I will say I am a little bit surprised that it really is a 1-for-1, right? It's Slasher out, it's Arcties in. I did expect to see a little bit of some change-ups when it came down to the other 3 players. It sounds like this could be one of the more definite type of rosters right now. And so if that is the case, a lot of question marks on Gorillas. I think this will definitely test somebody like Arcties, but I do think that this is going to be a long-running move. I hope that this is a long-term relationship based off of what LAG, I'm sure, had to do to get a player like Arcties. I hope that this is a partnership that, at least for them, lasts for a while. There is definitely a possibility that they could pick up players once the game comes out. Like, there is no doubt that despite having 3 players on this team, they got rid of their bench, right? They got rid of Asim, they got rid of Gunless. That bench is open, so you could definitely put one of these guys in the bench position, trade him away, whatever it may be, and bring in other players as time goes on. So I will emphasize that because I think that could be something that happens with this roster. But again, some question marks, some interest, but let's go ahead and jump to the other team. It is a straight 1-for-1 trade. It sounds like Arcties goes to the Gorillas and Slasher steps in for the Atlanta FaZe. So we spent like 30 minutes in our last video talking about how, it could be this player, it could be that player. And I did say, I did mention somebody like Slasher at the time of recording it. He was starting to be linked to that team more and more. I would say it does surprise me a tad bit to see Slasher possibly as this roster's 4th, not just because it's Slasher, but just because Arcties isn't here. Very, very surprised that we did see the move be made. Slasher had a great end to his Vanguard season. He really improved in the Search Destroy. The only issue that I really have, I just don't know if they're really going to mix well, because Slasher has had his chance to work with younger talent. I think they're eager to have that designated leader alongside of them. I can just see, I don't know, somebody taking something the wrong way. That to me could be a thing to look out for when it comes down to Atlanta FaZe. There is no doubt about it. If I am Slasher, I'm smiling from ear to ear. The ability to play with these 3 guys, especially after having a very difficult last 3 seasons. I mean, all 3 years of the CDL, he went from being on that OGLA team that had tons of promise that never really got anywhere, being on that LA Thieves team back in Cold War where he was in the lineup, then he was dropped, he was brought back for champs. They said it was like one of his more difficult seasons that he's ever had to encounter. And then being with the Gorillas, who had that great moment at Major 2. They won the championship. They actually beat the Atlanta FaZe. But other than that moment for Slasher in last year's title of Vanguard, no real success for the Gorillas, especially to close out the year. But I think given who is available, you couldn't necessarily give calls to every single roster that you wanted. If you really wanted somebody like Pred or Sib, you were going to have to fight Seattle Surge tooth and nail to be able to lock those guys up. So, and I think that Slasher could be maybe exactly what this team needs. So we will see exactly how that goes. Let's go and jump now to the next team, that being the Toronto Ultra. They've also been mixed up in a lot of moves. Now it sounds like they're bringing in Scrappy and maybe Hixie. I think Scrappy is definitely the most prominent one. The one that is not surprising, but the one that we have to talk about most is going to be Hixie here. It was talked and discussed that Afro was going to be Toronto's target. The fact that now he is linked to be going to the Minnesota Rocker is very interesting. But in my eyes right now for Toronto, I would be looking at Hixie. I would also be taking a look at Vickle. I think Vickle has a lot of promise, plays somewhat of a similar role to Kleenex in terms of just that fast SMG, but I have really liked what I saw from Hixie throughout this last season for Toronto NA. Same thing with Scrappy. And I know there's a lot of potential that really is going to fall on Hixie and Kleenex to really be a great SMG pair together. I expect Scrappy to be great. I think he will instantly be in that Rookie of the Year conversation from day one. A lot of expectations on for him to perform, but a lot would fall on Hixie's shoulders as well. A lot of things to be excited about, but you definitely do have your questions still on this new Toronto team. Now moving ahead to Boston Breach. Okay, Vivid, Nero, Awakening, and Method/Clayster. So another interesting one. There's been a lot of news developing around what could be going down with Boston over these past few days. It sounded like Awakening could be headed to Boston Breach, so that sounds like a move that could very well be made. Now, I came into this offseason expecting Methods to be a lock. I really did. Like, I did not imagine that they would be moving away from somebody like him. Talking more about Awakening, I really actually like this addition for Boston Breach. I would have liked either Paul X or Awakening on this team. I also like Awakening for the S&D. I like Awakening for just the raw slaying talent that he is. And I think having him alongside some aggressive SMGs, he's played SMG, in his past, this could be a very fast-paced type of roster now moving forward. Now the big one, right? Clay or Methods? Like, who would you guys choose in this situation? And I feel like for Boston Breach, it depends on what you want. Like, I think that Methods provides a lot for this team. We saw him have just a wonderful run during, I think it was like Major 2, where he was like leading in KD. He was the guy for the team. The problem for Boston, at least in my eyes, is that when they switched away from Methods, playing from his play style, his dominant play style type of maps, they got off the Gavutus, they got off the, the hardcore Berlins, and they started playing the Bokages of the world. Like, they really started to change up their game plan based off of these two. So now that you bring in a great complementary piece like Awakening, you've got 3 players, and obviously if they're extending players like Nero and Vivid, they're going to believe in this trio of players. So do you want to have Methods lead the troops again, or do you want to bring in somebody who has tons of experience, somebody who's won world championships, somebody who has worked with young players and seen tons of success, won world championships? In fact, it depends on what you want. So I think if you are looking to see somebody really harvest the talent, bring that more out of these young guys, I think you go with Clay. I think if you're just looking for another solid AR, somebody that you can rely on, somebody who can pick up the pace, be that solid slayer, I think that you bring in somebody like Method. So really going to be an interesting next few days for Boston Breach to see who they choose in that role. We'll now jump into the New York subliners. So what a time it has been. Like, Hydra was linked to teams like Optic Texas. There were rumors that maybe he could even be a possible pickup for somebody like Atlanta FaZe. NYSL has probably had a very stressful time trying to make sure that they could lock up the French phenom coming into this year. And so one thing that really excites me about this NYSL team is I would like to see the second year of Hydra and Kismet together. I feel like we saw them have some great moments. They were a primary reason why we saw this team look so good in Hardpoint. Whenever they were starting to go on that run, a lot of times it comes down to your SMGs. The moment that Kismet joined the lineup, that's whenever they started to see all that success. I think Sky's now getting a spotlight type of role. This will be one of the more talked about teams in the CDL this season. One of the more gifted, just gun skill players when we talk about ARs, really, since he's joined the league. And this could be his biggest opportunity yet, with the Florida Mutineers never really in the spotlight when we talk about the end of the year, finishing last or top 8 when it comes down to champs, or even not making it this past season. Definitely has not been fun, I'm sure, from his perspective. Now the 4th, it does sound like it's still up in the air. It just feels like Priesta probably is in the lead for this position, but if you do go on to read it, you'll see that there are other guys who could be linked here. Players like Major Maniac could be in this position. It sounded like there could be an opportunity where Slasher could have gone to the New York subliners, which I think would have been very interesting. I do like Priesta being in this spot. If NYSL were going to be working as hard as they possibly could have to keep Hydra on the team, if they knew that if they had Hydra, then they had Skies, I felt like there was an opportunity where maybe the main AR wasn't going to be somebody like a Cammy or an Attach or even an Arcides, but somebody like a Priesta, for example, who's going to go under the radar, given that he hasn't had the greatest 2-year stretch under the Minnesota Rocker, especially last year when he was put into the main AR role. There were times where he was looking great. There were times where it wasn't amazing, but I like the leadership on the team. I like a lot of things about NYSL, but there definitely are some question marks. And speaking of question marks, what's going on with the London Royal Ravens? Like, now it sounds like Paul X could be on this team with the departure of somebody like Afro. It just feels like, at least based off of reports. Now, it very well could be likely that, maybe Crone or whoever is feeding information or giving out, different roster possibilities, that there's just not a whole lot known about what's going on with London. Whether there actually is or not, I think is something to very much consider. But if I am the Ravens, you can't go into next season, I would imagine, with this team, right? I mean, Gizmo can definitely run a sub from time to time. There's no doubt about it. Bringing in Paul, which I feel like is a good addition. He's going to have that Ravens reunion. We know he was the substitute for this team. He likes playing with these kind of guys. I think that Zero and Paul, you definitely move forward with. But if I'm the Ravens, I'm giving a call to Wardy. I'm giving a call to Vickle. I'm giving a call to Beans. For those who don't know, just top NA/EU challenger talent who comes from the EU region. I give these guys a call, and I'm not saying they haven't done that, but I am saying that that is something that I would definitely be doing if I am the Ravens. Based off of what we saw last year, I think the Ravens need to change up. I'm not sure if just bringing in Paul X in place of Afro is obviously going to do that. Let's jump in quickly now to the Las Vegas Legion, which it sounds like there's not a whole lot going on with Las Vegas. At least that's solidified. It sounds like Temp is definitely going to be here for next season, which could be the right move for Las Vegas. Had a great slaying year last season, but just never really got to see the success with the players that were brought in. And you can kind of read it here, but basically it just says the early reports were that Clayster, TJ, Venom could be linked to this team. And if I was a betting man, I would say whoever doesn't get that main AR position on Boston probably goes to Las Vegas, whether that is Methods or whether that is going to be Clay. That's the way that I think this roster goes. So I think you head into next season of MW with either Clay and Temp or Methods and Temp. That would be my prediction. But there are a lot of great options still available, I think, if you're Las Vegas. I don't think you're in a panic mode as of yet, but there could be a moment for panic because there has been so much slander tossed on the Florida Mutineers, and I'm going to do my very, very best to try to show off the entire bit of moves that Florida very well could be making. The players that I'm hearing that they have talked to, I like a lot, right? They have been linked to talking to Asim, Gunless, Crim6, Standy, Major Maniac, Havoc, challenger players like Vickle, Beans, and Wardy. But it does say that they have indeed looked at almost every option that is available. So I like that. If you are Florida, again, is building around Dave Patty the 100% thing you should do? Not guaranteed, but out of the list of players that are available here and that they're probably looking at, I like that. I like that we have challenger players, specifically EU challenger players. I know Vickle, you know, from Spain, but you know, you can kind of identify him as either. Regardless, I like that they are looking in that department because I feel like that is exactly what you should be doing. Krim has talked about, you know, whenever he did face off against that roster, the Toronto EU team, and he saw what those guys were doing, he was very, very impressed with what he saw. So I like the possibilities for Florida. I think you could say the same thing when it comes down to the Las Vegas roster as well, but there is a lot of talent that is available still as free agents. So I mean, you could just take a look at this list and just be like, okay, yeah, let's do Asim, let's do Vickle, because those two guys were already linked to be going to Florida toward the end of last year, so those could be like your targets. Then let's say that we bring in Gunless as the flex and Krim as the main AR. I think that's a good team. Now, is it top of the league? No, but if you are Florida, who I think are trying to wait it out a little bit, I think that there is talent mixed in here that could make you at least a middle of the pack type of roster. So what I want to do is bring you guys now to this page, because this is what every roster would look like on paper if that article is in fact 100% accurate. So you can kind of see how all the lineups look, how they would stack up against each other, you know, the official free agents that are technically still on the board. I know you can't fully see all the challenger talent. I want to give love to everybody that's on this list. I hesitate to like go really in depth with all these teams because there is a lot of opportunity for more moves to be made. Whenever the rosters are announced, I'm going to go in depth on each and every single one, talk very specific, you know, a lot of specifics about each roster, but I did want to show you guys what it does look like if all of these teams do in fact end up being correct from what we know up until this point. But let me know down in the comments what your guys' thoughts are on all of these teams, right? Did you hear something that you thought was interesting about some of these rosters? How do you feel about these rumored teams moving into MW2? Is there a team that you really do like? Is there a team that you really don't like? A lot of opportunities for conversation down in the comments below. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I promise we will be back very soon with some more off-season content, with some more Roster Mania content. I appreciate your guys' patience as we wait for chaos, I imagine, to erupt. But thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I will see you all in the next one. Take it easy, and I'll see you back on the channel very soon.